Hello chess friends, this is International Master Valeri Lilov, and right now I'd like to start talking about some very important and interesting opening traps. See, the topic on the opening traps has been very important because people play blitz, they play bullet, they play rapid games, and they want to know how they can actually trick their opponents in the most common openings that they play. And this is why I have prepared some very interesting ideas on what you actually can keep in mind when it comes down to these openings. So, the game we're going to start with was played between Grandmaster Boris Avror, a very famous Grandmaster from Israel, and his opponent was the woman Grandmaster, a very experienced woman Grandmaster named Almira Skripchenko. This game is interesting because it will actually show how even some of the best Grandmasters of the world can still get trapped in the opening. So, the game started with the move of e4, then black played e5, and then we have bishop to the c4. Now, this is known as the bishop's opening, and it's one of the systems that is particularly, underrated. It's like people saying, oh, bishop's opening, then black should be able to easily meet it and get a good game, which in some way, that's actually right. But there are many, many positions in which this is incorrect. So after bishop to c4, black played actually pawn knight to f6, and then white goes with d4. Now the real reason behind that opening is because when white is able to play with pawn up to the d4, he continues to choose and open up the center quite quickly. Now, black of course has a couple of different options now, but mainly he's got to take on the d4 with edicts to the d4. Everybody will do it simply because if they don't, if they play something like knight takes d4 for example, there is going to be the move of d takes e5, and I think that you realize that this pawn on e5 turns out very important. I mean, including the ability of white to play queen d5 and go for some challenge against f7 and e4, we realize that this pawn, it turns like a very strong nail within black's position. So I do have to admit, it's almost forcing that black should take on the d4. And now what happens when he actually takes on d4? When he takes on the d4, white continues with the move of knight f3. Now that sounds strange because everybody will expect that you either push the pawn or the queen takes on d4. So why is knight f3? I mean, white obviously relies on a bit of a faster development, but is this really the best way to go? So black chooses to challenge white, and therefore he naturally takes the pawn. Now, when that pawn's taken, white plays queen takes d4, black plays knight f6, and everything literally looks very solid. If you look at black, he's actually up to go with the move of bishop e7 next. He's going to castle, and he's going to have a very comfortable position. That queen will most likely get challenged when black brings out his knight. So we realize it's nothing really that special. But the truth is, the position has opened, and white's getting ready to bring the rest of his pieces quickly. So actually that is the correct move in this, the correct order as well. And you'd really like to remember the order. I mean, any trap relies on a number of different features that actually make it special. This trap here relies on the ability for white to quickly bring out his pieces and use the open space in order to launch this very quick attack against the black king. For example, if black plays a move like knight to c6, for instance, there's queen h4, bishop e7, and now we've got the ability for white to play bishop to g5, which is something very substantial. If black goes d5, then white will be able to castle alongside, bishop e6, and now rook h e1, which is a really substantial, and really good development out there. So white has these two rooks, the power of attacking the f6 knight, and actually, if it's moved away, no matter how, it's like d5 is going to hang. So we get to realize that this is just a very inconvenient type of position for black. So that's why in the game itself, black chose to play pawn to c6. This move's connected with the idea of d5, and in reality black would hope that by advancing that pawn right up to the d5, he'll be able to challenge the white bishop and then develop his own. So it's a pretty standard move. Now after c6, white continues with bishop to g5, and I think that this is one of the key moves in this position. Now, the bishop on g5 isn't going to really destroy the black formation, but what it does is that it actually forces certain pressure against the opponent over the f6, and that's what we like. So black plays d5, and then white castles alongside, which is a great deal. Now the rooks got connected, and the bishops are open. The queen is well placed in the center, and the rest of white's pieces are perfectly well coordinated. It's just a matter of time for white to really organize them and start the attacks against black's position. Now, what is going to happen if black just develops with bishop e7? So that's exactly what black did in the game. I mean, it's a standard move, it looks fine, and what should white do? See, sometimes setting up a trap doesn't actually mean that you should necessarily win. You got to remember that. Very often it means that you got to keep a good tension against the opponent and make sure that you have the right coordination amongst your pieces. That's why white plays queen to h4 right now. That opens the road of the rook, so basically it hits the d5 to d8, and also the queen is very well placed on the king side, just in case if black castles, white is going to have the ability to play bishop d3, attack h7, and put some pretty significant pressure out. So after queen h4, black obviously is a bit challenged. I mean, it's not too easy to find out what to do, and he plays knight d7. So how do we really lead up with the attack after that move is taking place? So obviously he's going to bring out the knight, and he's hoping to get the safety. Well, obviously if white retreats or if he chooses to go back, that's not going to help. You see, knight b3, bishop b3, or even a move like bishop to the d3, these are just moves that I guess black can very easily handle with knight c5 or short castles. No, if you're attacking, the key is that you never retreat, especially when it's in the opening. In the opening, a retreat will just mean the end of your attack. So white played nothing else but the excellent rook h to e1. Rook h to e1 was perfect because that helped white to set the both rooks on the e and d lines. And now we get to realize that black has a choice. And yes, he does. Actually, he can decide what to do. In this position, he can choose to capture the bishop, which is the actual trap, or castle. Now, castling, which looks fine, is really not going to give black anything that great. And the reason is because if he actually does castle, white has the attack going with a move like bishop d3, for instance. And now we see that h7 is a bit under a problem. If black plays, for example, a move like g6 in order to protect it, we got rook e2, which is beautiful as it actually joins with rook to the e1. And you realize that while it will be really in a distant future that black will get to use that actual pawn, white's got some amazing combinations. For example, in case of king to g7, which looks like a move that will protect the f6 knight, instead of taking it, white's gotten this amazing bishop f5 move that is completely tearing black's position apart. For example, if the bishop f5, white's got the possibility to think of a move like bishop takes d7. Then we got the pressure that goes against e7 and f6. And with that move in line, we realize that if black plays with g takes f, then the next move is going to be rook takes e7. And it's just very difficult to believe that black has a good game anymore. So rook takes e7. Obviously, rook takes e7, and I mean you can see what's coming, right? It's just it's everything just gets completely torn apart right now. For example, rook takes e7, queen takes e7, bishop h6. The king has to go. Then we have queen g5, and black cannot really stop the threat of queen g7 just because his pieces aren't right. So if he plays knight e8, we got queen takes e7, and this is simply awful, I suppose, in this aspect. So, really talking about the position after bishop f5, we can understand how hard and difficult it will be for black. Even a move like knight e4 wouldn't help, because after knight takes d, d takes d, rook takes d, it really exchanges a knight that wasn't doing as much before. So now that rook takes the action, we gotta check. We gotta check with the queen. I mean, take a look at this. This is what really the coordinated pieces do. And now we realize the whole idea. When the king moves, there's bishop f8, and black simply checkmated. It's very beautiful to see a trap in a similar way, where actually everything looks safe for black, and suddenly he turns out losing. The other move, which is h6, just doesn't help either, because if he does it, we have bishop takes h6, g takes h6, and queen takes h6, and now there is no even single piece that can actually help to the black king side. For example, white can do now knight g5, knight f8, rook e3, and there is no defense. There's practically no defense against rook g3 coming on the next move. It's pretty amazing. So, talking about all these variations, really, it just we cannot ignore that white's attack becomes so powerful. But in reality, what's going to happen? You're probably wondering what's going to happen if black just takes the bishop, because taking the bishop sounds very natural. Sure, white has a lot of powers, firepower. He's got the two rooks, the bishop, and the queen. But what's really going on after d takes to the c4? And now what's going on is really straightforward. If you have so much power and you're trying to make it work, think about what's defending, what's keeping your opponent safe. The only thing that was keeping him safe at this point was the knight on f6. The moment white took on it, then black recaptures with the pawn, and then white does knight e4, we realize that it's like black has no way on handling this attack, really. Just there's knight xf6, there's knight d6, there's queen h6. In fact, black tried to castle. Yeah, that's the most natural. I mean, moves like king f8 wouldn't help. If black tries queen f8, there is just knight d4. That's a kind of a reinforcing move that just sets the white knight ready to move on to f5. And we suddenly realize that the variety of different moves that black can use to protect wouldn't be enough. Like h5, then there is knight f5. If black chooses to play with something like short castles, which black did in the game, now white found an extremely powerful move. If you have this position with white, what exactly would you like to do? I mean, think about it. This is one of the most important positions. And I guess the real question is, what is white supposed to do in this moment? At this point, is he supposed to carry on with an attack? Is he supposed to just make a threat? What is he supposed to do right now? Now, while you're thinking, think about that. If you can't make the real attack happen in a moment or two, then probably there's a good reason for that. And that doesn't necessarily need to be the fact that you're behind or you just can't make a check. Sometimes it's just that your pieces do not have a good coordination, or at least not a sufficient one in order to guarantee a good advantage. Now that's exactly what was white's problem in this case. So all of the moves like queen g4, rook e3, they're good, but not sufficient enough. I realized that suddenly he needs to have that rook. But first, we need to have the knight. Because the queen and the knight are the two most powerful attackers in the game. And then when the knight being on the g3 and having the opportunity to go to f5, it's so impossible for black to hold this game. Actually, when this moment came through, black was just in an awful position. Like, in reality, if he plays with a move like king h8, which in fact he did in the game, then we realize that white's got that knight f5 possibility coming, and this is just too difficult to handle. Why is that? Because black's piece simply can't confront white in any good way. He tried bishop c5, and probably this was the only moment where white made a slight type of a mistake. In fact, what white did was the move of queen to h5, which I think was really not that good. It wasn't a bad move for sure, but it would have been better if white actually brought another piece on, because regrouping your pieces is a good thing, but bringing some new powers is even better. So for example, a move like rook e4 would have guaranteed white's rook the ability to play, together with the knight. And now we suddenly realize that if black tries to defend that way, there is knight e5. So he cannot take the knight either way because of the two pins on f6 and d7, and because of the attack on f7 just as well. So after the move of bishop c5, white just did this slight type of a mistake with queen h5. But in reality, that doesn't do too much, because in the next move the rook is still coming. Black played queen to b6 in order to come across with the queen and attack, and white just stabilized. It really isn't possible for black to do something. Rook g8 and queen takes f7. Rook h4 is coming anyway, and as I said before, it's just impossible for black to stop it. He's got a couple of checks. Maybe queen takes f5, but in reality it's deadly. If the rook takes, we have queen g7, and the game's practically over. One of the most amazing things about this whole game, if you actually see it from the very beginning, was the way on how white was able to actually sacrifice that pawn. And this is a really interesting trap that you can try. Sacrificing that pawn with the main goal to really open up the development of your pieces and get ready to attack against your opponent's kingside. Try that out. It's a smart trap, it's an interesting idea, and I feel like that's going to actually help you to get a lot of people unprepared and quite not ready to handle the attacks coming in.